I suppose I should have been more cautious the first time my wife came home from her job at the art gallery, brimming with excitement over a new patron. But when you trust someone completely, especially after 17 worry-free years together, your instinct is to give them the benefit of the doubt. My instinct, however, was very wrong. On Dangle Garcia and my wife is Sarah. We've met at a small Midwestern university 18 years ago, started dating 17 years ago, and got married 16 years ago. Our family grew with the addition of our daughter 14 years ago and our son 12 years ago. I work as a computer programmer for a government agency, earning a decent but not extraordinary salary. It was sufficient for Sarah to be a stay-at-home mom while our children were young. 2 years ago, feeling the kids were old enough, she decided to re-enter the workforce. She secured a 30-hour-per-week job at an upscale art gallery in town. This suited her perfectly. Sarah was an art major in college, so she was already well-versed in the world of art. The gallery attracted a clientele with deeper pockets than ours. We live in a large Midwestern city, so there was no shortage of affluent patrons to keep the gallery thriving. Sarah's job allowed her to mingle with these well-to-do individuals, enjoying a taste of their lifestyle before returning to her more modest reality. Occasionally, I join her at gallery events, tagging along as her plus one. It was a thrilling experience rubbing shoulders with executives, politicians, attorneys, and bank presidents, far from the typical company of computer geek like me. Keats, from time to time, Sarah would come home buzzing with stories of meeting some celebrity or influential person. Our kids and I would watch as she seemed to float through the house, temporarily lifted by her brush with glamour. Eventually, she crashed back down to the reality of our life. Unfortunately, Sarah didn't handle this transition gracefully. The kids would often retreat to their rooms, leaving me to absorb the brunt of her snarky comments about our life for the rest of the evening. Most of the time, I managed to take it in stride. When it did start to wear on me, I'd escape to the garage and tinker with my car. In recent weeks, Sarah had been endlessly talking about a new patron of the gallery, a hotshot real estate prodigy, James Smith. A 28-year-old millionaire had recently moved into a lavish new home and was seeking art that matched his upscale lifestyle. Sarah seemed genuinely impressed by him, although she noted that he appeared quite taken with himself. She frequently mentioned how handsome and well put together he was, and often talked about his various physical pursuits like bicycling and rock climbing. Sarah's enthusiasm about a new patron wasn't unusual, so I didn't think much of it. I let her go on about him for the next couple of weeks. Eventually, as I expected, her excitement waned and I didn't hear another word about James Smith until I met him at the gallery's Christmas gala just a few weeks before the holiday. I must admit he was an impressive sight, standing about 6'2", 190 pounds and looking solid in an expensive Armani suit. His blonde hair, blue eyes, and striking good looks even caught my somewhat skeptical eye. I hadn't been quite prepared for that. Our conversation lasted about 30 seconds as Sarah introduced us, but even in that brief time, I noticed him eyeing my wife from head to toe, much like a predator assessing its prey. Sarah was stunning that night in a blue tailored skirt and jacket with just a hint of cleavage peeking from her white blouse. However, his look was more or have a leer than simple admiration. Sarah seemed too preoccupied with the gala to notice, but I certainly did. As Sarah went off to mingle, I headed to the bar. I poured myself a shot of Jack Daniels over ice and soon found David Brown, the husband of one of Sarah's co-workers. We had met before and got along well, often bonding over our shared interests in sports and cars. David and I chatted for a bit before I did some mingling myself. About an hour later, I noticed Sarah in a small group of people with James Smith practically draped over. I decided to intervene. I grabbed as usual drink AA wrestling from the bar and walked up to them, introducing myself. I handed Sarah her glass of wine. Then subtly but firmly, I removed James' hand from Sarah's right hip where it had settled from around her back. He just smirked at me as he retracted his hand. I stayed with the group for a few minutes and soon Sarah moved on to mingle with more guests while I went in a different direction, ensuring that James wasn't following her. I continued to mingle, expecting to see Sarah circulating among her co-workers. However, after an hour, I realized I hadn't seen her anywhere. I took a quick look around and noticed that James was also missing. Alarm bells went off in my head, so I made it a priority to find Sarah. Not finding her in the gallery, I stepped outside and circled the building. I saw clusters of people in the parking lot seemingly preparing to leave, but still no sign of Sarah. Then I noticed a black Jaguar XD with a couple sitting rather intimately in the back seat. The car was running, and they were seated closely together. Trusting my instincts, I assumed it was Sarah and James. I walked up to the car and opened the door next to the woman. Both of occupants jumped at the intrusion, and while I couldn't be sure if they were kissing, they were certainly close to it. "Time to go, dear." "Now," I said in the firmest polite tone I could muster. "And we were just," Sarah stammered as James offered me a smirk. "I don't care. It's time to leave." "Leave," I reiterated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Really, Daniel, you have to come in and hear this sound system." James chimed in. "It's absolutely crystal clear." Soft concert music played from the car stereo, but it was obvious neither of them was paying attention to the music. "Another time, James. We really must be going," I replied noncommittal. I helped Sarah out of the car, and we began walking toward my Ford F-150. "Wait, I can't leave yet. The party's got another 2 hours on, supposed to stay and help host," Sarah protested urgently. "If your boss has an issue, he can call me directly," I said sharply. "What were you thinking?" "We were really just listening to his car's sound system. It's incredible," she insisted on, still evident in her voice. "Aha," I replied dryly, unimpressed. Despite Sarah's claims, a coolness lingered between us for a couple of weeks. Eventually, I let it go and things returned to normal. So it caught me off guard when a few months later, Sarah announced she had accepted an invitation to James Lake Cottage for the 4th of July weekend. The guest list included us, Sarah's boss and his wife, and 2 other married couples who were friends of James. We were supposed to head up on Friday afternoon and stay until midday Sunday, with James hosting the entire weekend featuring grilling, a full bar, swimming, boating, and other activities. I started to object, but before I could voice my concerns, Sarah cut me off, insisting we were going, and then walked away. The weekend actually started off splendidly. We spent several hours on James' sizable sailboat enjoying the lake. The women looked stunning in their bikinis while us guys managed to pull off the baggy swim trunks look. To be honest, James probably had the best physique among us, though thankfully he didn't seem to be any better endowed than the rest of us. Sarah, despite being the second oldest of the 5 women, was arguably the most striking in her black bikini, which accentuated her 36T bust and shapely figure without being overly revealing. James's backyard at the cottage was impressively set up with a top-notch grill and a fridge filled with beer, wine, and ice for mixed drinks. He marinated a batch of steaks and expertly worked the grill while the rest 8 of us lounged nearby, drinks in hand. James was the perfect host, and he kept his distance from Sarah, who also made sure to maintain a polite distance compared to their interactions around Christmas. The first night went smoothly, and we all retired to our rooms around midnight, with James the only single person retreating to the master bedroom alone. Saturday kicked off with a visit to the charming little tourist town by the lake filled with quaint shops. The women returned with several purchases, clearly enjoying themselves. A hearty lunch of hero sandwiches followed, and then a spontaneous volleyball game broke out. After the game, the drinking began, and that night's grilling consisted of sausages and shredded pork. We relished another delicious meal and spent a couple of hours chatting. Later in the evening, Sarah's boss John suggested a walk around the lake, which I agreed to, thinking it was after all we had consumed. The walk took about 30 minutes, but upon our return, my mood soured. I found Sarah lounging in a chair, leaning back against James, who had his hands around her waist. As John and I approached, Sarah smiled and got up, albeit not hastily, clearly aware of my feelings as she avoided eye contact and took a seat in the chair next to me for most of the evening. Despite her apparent attempts to feign innocence, I caught Sarah and James exchanging furtive glances throughout the night, believing they went unnoticed. Similar to the previous night, the party began to wind down around midnight. The other 3 couples made their way to their respective bedrooms, but Sarah quietly asked me to join her in the kitchen. For the first time all evening, she looked me directly in the eyes and declared, "James has asked me to sleep in his bed tonight, and I've accepted his offer." I must have blacked out or something. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah just told me she was going to spend the night with James. I stared at her in disbelief, unsure if I had understood correctly. "This isn't about love," she explained. "I've been completely faithful to you for 17 years, and you're the only man I love, but tonight I want to be with James. He excites me, and I need to know what it feels like to be with a different man. After tonight, I promise I'll return to being your devoted wife for the rest of our lives, but I believe you owe me this one night." I stood there stunned and speechless, trying to process her words. My wife was telling me she wanted to sleep with another man because she felt she deserved it, and I owed her that. "Over my dead body, are you going to sleep with him?" I finally managed to say. "This isn't up for negotiation, Daniel," she replied firmly. "Accept it for what it is. Tonight I am his. Tomorrow, and for the rest of my life, I'll be yours." "Don't be so sure about that, babe," I responded angrily. "Remember, there are consequences to every action." "God dented, Daniel," she hissed. "You have to see everything so black and white. It's just one night for God's sake, one night and done. You're going to ruin everything for everyone. Just one night. We never anticipated you being so intractable. I probably should have just kept my mouth shut and gone behind your back, but I was terrified that if you found out it would definitely be the end of us. So I figured if you knew and let me go, it wouldn't be cheating." With that, she spun on her heel and walked away. As I emerged from the kitchen and moved into the living room, I saw Sarah take James' hand and lead him towards the master bedroom. My vision blurred, likely from the tears welling up in my eyes. I made my way to the indoor bar and poured myself a shot of Jack Daniels. It took me about 5 minutes to finish, and when I did, I quietly approached the master bedroom door. The unmistakable sounds of two people making love emanated from within. In that moment, I knew my life as I had known it was over. I downed several more shots of Jack, desperately trying to figure out my next move. My initial impulse was to leave and initiate a divorce immediately, but the thought of being away from my kids for most of the time was unbearable. I couldn't see how that decision would benefit either me or them. Yet the reality of my wife being in another man's bed at that very moment was something I couldn't just accept. For a fleeting moment, I even contemplated burning the house down, but sanity prevailed. At some point, I must have passed out because when I checked my watch, it was 3 a.m. and the entire house was eerily quiet. I stumbled into the bedroom, but Sarah and I have been assigned. The bed was still neatly made since it hadn't been slept in, just as I expected. I collapsed on top of the bedspread and attempted to sleep, though it was restless. By 7:30 a.m., I dragged myself out of bed, took a quick shower, and brushed my teeth before heading to the kitchen. The other 3 couples were already up enjoying a breakfast of bacon and eggs. Emily, the wife of Sarah's boss John, seemed to be the chief cook and offered me a plate as the others mumbled their good mornings. The sideways glances and pitying looks made it clear that everyone knew what had happened. My face burned with humiliation knowing I was the center of their unspoken pity. "It's okay, Daniel. We've all seen this before," Emily said sympathetically as the others nodded in agreement. "James has done this 3 or 4 other times. He's an alpha male when he sees something he wants, he goes after it. It's just the way he's wired. I also think he enjoys the humiliation aspect of it," John added. "But I don't think it's personal. It's just his nature." "So what happened to those other couples he's done this to?" I asked. "Well, as far as I know, they are all still married," Emily replied. "It's kind of silly to break up a marriage of many years over one night if you think about it, especially when there are kids involved." Ashley, one of the other wives, chimed in. "You mean he specifically targets married women with children so the kids can be used as leverage for the affair?" I asked incredulously. "It kind of looks that way," chimed in Christopher, Ashley's husband. "But honestly, he's a great guy aside from that one quirk. I've known him since college, and once you're his friend, you've got a friend for life. So I can overlook that flaw. Plus, it doesn't seem to harm the couples in the long run. For instance, James helped his last affair and her husband get a fantastic deal on a condo in North Carolina. Now he even stays with them when he's in the area." Just then, we heard moaning coming from the master bedroom. It was Sarah, and the sounds made it clear that her night with James had extended into the morning. Everyone at the table turned red with embarrassment, while I felt a cold fury rising within me. "Why don't we finish breakfast on the deck?" Emily suggested. Sarah and James joined us on the deck about 30 minutes later, both looking freshly showered and quite pleased with themselves. I had to admit, Sarah was positively glowing and didn't seem the least bit ashamed of the situation. Carrying a plate of breakfast, she came over to the chase where I was sitting and perched on the edge while I moved my feet to make room for her back, faced me, and I noticed the pink hue of her skin above her tank top. There was also a noticeable bite mark on her right shoulder, just under the strap of her tank and bra. She acknowledged me with just a nod, and I saw no reason to break the silence. "So what are everyone's plans for this afternoon?" James asked in a cool, convivial host-like manner. "I think we need to get back and spend some time with the kids this afternoon. Don't use we," I said, addressing Sarah's back. She hesitated for a moment, and I could tell from the civil movement of her hair that she was rolling her eyes at me. One of those instinctive cues you pick up after being together for so long. Sitting across from everyone else, her eye roll was on full display, and it took all my self-control not to reach over and slap the back of her unfaithful head. "I was hoping we could stay a bit longer and maybe go sailing again, dear," she said flatly. "Nope, we need to go get back. You finish your breakfast. I'll load the car. Wheels moving in 10 minutes, I said as I headed inside. I packed the car in record time. When I returned to the deck, Sarah was just finishing her breakfast. I grabbed her by the wrist, gave a quick wave, said a hurried goodbye to everyone, and practically dragged Sarah to the car. I didn't need to look at anyone's faces to gauge their thoughts. I already knew because I was thinking the same thing. With the exception of the radio playing softly, the drive was shrouded in silence for the first 45 minutes. Sarah mostly stared out the passenger window. You're likely avoiding eye contact to prevent an eruption. She must have sensed that meeting my gaze would spark the inevitable confrontation. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Was it worth it? I half spoke. She remained still for a moment before taking a deep breath and turning toward me. Yes, it was wonderful, she cooed, a distant look in her eyes. That was not the response I expected. I wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe some stammering apart actual truth, a lot of backpedaling, perhaps an apology, but certainly not the blunt, unvarnished truth. Her expression confirmed it. She wasn't lying. 17 years, 2 kids, everything we've built together. Undone in one night? I asked. She turned further toward me, her face a mix of sadness and resignation. That's up to you, Daniel, she replied. I promised this was a one-time thing, and now I'll be as faithful as I was before last night. It was an incredible night, and now it's over. But if you can lose your love for me that quickly and are willing to break up our family, then do what you need to do. Just remember, I'll get the kids, and I'll make sure they know you ruined our family. I was stunned into silence. Not even an apology, and she was prepared to pin the breakdown of our family on me. She and James must have orchestrated this perfectly. I had never seen this Sarah before, and I certainly didn't like it. So I can assume then that this morning's activity with James was a calculated move meant to humiliate me, I asked. Not entirely. He wanted one more time before I resumed being the faithful wife to my husband, is willing to play by my rules. We stopped at the in-laws to pick up the kids for Sarah. It was as if nothing had changed. Despite my good relationship with her parents, Matthew and Jessica, I couldn't consider my ex-wife a friend. Our interactions were limited to events involving the kids. While we maintained cordiality during these occasions, unlike some who managed to forge a friendship post-divorce, it wasn't in the cards for us. The wound of disrespect was too deep for me to truly forgive. My children eventually forgave their mother, and that was fine by me as she is their mother. We didn't discuss Sarah among ourselves, and my in-laws didn't bring her up either. Megan got along well with Sarah during group gatherings, and I was delighted to be grandparents when grandchildren began to arrive. Here, I witnessed a side of Megan I hadn't anticipated. So, Sarah and I were delighted to be grandparents, but Grandma Megan was ecstatic. She had unfulfilled maternal instincts that the grandchildren happily tapped into. She became a joyful, devoted grandmother, practically ridiculous in her enthusiasm. Sarah remarried and divorced twice more after me. Reflecting on this, Megan once remarked that Sarah might be searching for someone like me but was unable to find him. She then asked me for a promise that I would never leave her. There's no need for me to promise that, I replied. I made you a vow.